Lou Eisen, boxing historian and author, and we have a special show today on Ring Talk. We have one of my favorite authors in the world, Christian Giudice, excuse me, and I apologize if I did not pronounce that correctly. We want to talk about his wonderful book. He has a lot of wonderful books. You got to get his book on Wilfredo Gomez and The One Hands of Stone on Roberto Durán. But this one touched my heart, Beloved Warrior, on the magnificent Alexis Arguello. You'd have to say Arguello is one of the greatest all-time fighters that ever lived, pound for pound. But also in the lighter weights, I would say it's Durán and Arguello and Gomez, the three people that Christians captured better than anyone else on the planet. And he's just a wonderful person, and it's an honor and a privilege to have him here. Please welcome to Ring Talk, Christian Giudice.
Lou, hey, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
You said my name correctly.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I go through the same thing with my name, Eisen. So I just say to people, even in Canada, do you know President Eisenhower? Yes. Well, it's the same name without the Howard. Because people just don't get it. So what made you want to write a book on such a great character as Alexis Arguello?
Well, when I was growing up, I think I had two really strong affinities for Roberto Durán and Alexis Arguello. I think before I even started writing about boxing, those are two guys that stood out to me. I was a little bit younger at the time, to see them in their prime. But as I got older, I got to see their fights and really understood what they stood for in the ring. So after I wrote the book on Roberto Durán, I figured the next best fighter to approach would be Alexis Arguello. And I just loved everything about Arguello. It's hard not to. I mean, there are some fighters who are just hard not to like. Even if they're not your favorite fighter, they're not a guy who really epitomizes the style that you like. But Arguello, there were just so many things that made him likable and refreshing as a person. And we talked about earlier, accessible. And then you watch him in the ring, and it was pure, beauty watching him fight. And the layers to an Arguello fight was much different than what you saw with a guy like Roberto Durán. And so for me, I really that was the second guy who I really wanted to write about. I mean, and I got lucky in being able to write about him. But when I think about great Latin fighters, Arguello and Durán are up there. So I felt I really wanted to take that next step with Arguello at the time.
If the Mount Rushmore of the great Latin fighters. Well, you'd have to have more than four faces, but certainly, right, Arguello, Durán, Wilfredo Gomez, Salvador Sanchez, but the list is endless. Arguello was almost like Henri Matisse in the ring. He was a real artist, and there was no wasted moves. It was poetry in motion. He was a privilege to watch. And I always felt when I saw him that when the fight was over, that the announcer should say, you know what, he was even more brilliant than we thought. You guys got to chip in some more money. Because this guy was super. Now, he grew up in Nicaragua, right? In Managua.
Yes.
And was it relatively peaceful politically when he grew up?
When he grew up, no. This was when he was growing up. I think it was a lot more peaceful than later on. But
right.
He was someone who he grew up in a difficult, certainly a difficult upbringing. But not like not like I couldn't compare it to the way Durán grew up. But he definitely had a early childhood was difficult, but I think that the political situation really started to get, severe as he got older, with everything that was happening in Managua at the time.
Did I know when he was young, when he was 17, I think he moved to Toronto actually for a short time.
Yeah, that was his. I guess his dad sent him there, and that was a big. That opened his eyes to the world. He kind of called it his time, almost like a hippie time, he called it in his life. And yeah, he was, sent to Toronto, and then he came back, and he eventually started his boxing career. But yeah, that was something very unusual to write about. It was just, sort of just this little, his dad sent him there to work, and he learned. It was for him, it was like an eye-opening experience to see, to be outside of Managua. I mean, it would be for any young boy making that transition. But I think when he came back, he eventually, moved to boxing. Told his dad he wanted to go to the gym, but that was a very unique situation for a young boy from Managua.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because I know people coming from smaller Canadian provinces like Prince Edward Island, when they come to Toronto, they can't believe how big it is. And then when Torontonians go to New York, their minds get blown. We thought Toronto was big. This is a million times bigger and quicker. So coming from Managua, how did Alexis gravitate toward boxing when he was younger?
Yeah, during that time when Alexis started out, it was actually, he was like pleading with his father, to take me to the gym. I want to go to the gym. And he went there, and he just started. He started to kind of see himself in the ring, and as he started to make the transition to boxing, he also started to get connected with a lot of the older fighters. I think it was Edward Mouse Mojica at the time who became a mentor to him. And what he understood about boxing is that, I mean, how green he was at the time. Eventually, I don't want to jump ahead, but I mean, when he got together and he eventually started to become managed by Eduardo Roman, he started to recognize that that he was going to need more than what he was getting in Managua to really get that boxing education that he truly needed. And but I think, like, once he started to go to the gym, started to spar, it was just something that he really started to get this connection with.
One thing he had that very few boxers ever have had, only the really great ones, is patience. He had such patience in the ring, and he was so calm. Was that just developed for boxing, or was that part of his natural character as a person?
I think that's something that spawned out of the experience in boxing, and I think it was something that I think he learned a lot of those skills, those skills, patience, being calm, from Eduardo Roman when he was younger. Roman came into his life and started to, he started to introduce him to U.S. history and give him books and introduce him to aspects of his life, away from boxing, away from, to understand, as if to say, I care about you as a person, all right, and then secondary, I care about you, your boxing career. And I think one of the things with we talk about patience. Roman was a very calm person, not one to rage or to get amplified in his actions. And I don't know if that's something that he learned from Roman, but certainly, like you said, as he got older, sometimes you'd watch him fight, and you're like, okay, when is he going to step in and be the Alexis Arguello that we expect him to be? But I think there's something that was definitely he took from Roman as far as demeanor and how he carried himself. But then again, he also was very patient and calm in his his personal life. So I think those two things played a role.
I know that I remember watching him fight. Well, I remember watching him fight Oliveras. That was a brutal fight. But and Oliveras was one of the all-time great, talk about Mount Rushmore, bantamweight champions of all time. And Alexis took him apart. I mean, he stood there toe-to-toe and used that reach. But the fight, I remember, was way later. Billy Costello And I think Victor Valley, Costello's manager, trainer, really upset Alexis, and you never saw that in the ring, by saying his raps were illegal. And I thought, if there's one honest boxer in all of boxing history, it's Alexis Arguello. He would never do that to someone. And I just remembered the look on his face, and he was getting beat for a bit, but he was so calm. And going back to his corner after one of the rounds, he said to his trainer, "He's making a mistake. I'll get him now." And he got him.
Yeah, he was, that he talked about that being, allowing anger to take over as a boxer. And that was the only time he ever, well, against Limon, he also allowed it. He also got angry, but it was very unusual to see Alexis in that place of anger and allowing rage to take over. At that point in his career, it was also the sense of, here's a guy who was not feeling too comfortable outside of the ring. And I wonder if that also played a role, not very, the stability that he wanted in his life outside the ring wasn't there. And it makes sense that a lot of his fights earlier, he never allowed, those feelings of rage to enter into who he was as a fighter. But that was when you talk about Alexis and you think about him young and then you think about the older Alexis. I mean, you definitely, I want to say you see a difference in every fighter, but there was definitely this disconnect between who he was later and who he was earlier. And maybe disconnect isn't the best word for it, but like you said, against Costello, it was something that he let disrupt him that decades earlier he would have just pushed forward and say, bring on the fight, and not allowed him to shape how he approached the fight.
Right, because I remember after the fight, he said, "I've been doing this for over 30 years. I would never cheat on another man because he would take his life. And that's not what the sport's about." And I remember Ray Arcel saying, "Boxing is controlled fury." He said, "That's why Ali likes to get his opponents angry, because when you're angry, you don't fight well." So it was interesting to see that. What was the victory very early on over Kid Pambelli? Was that the turning point in his young career?
I don't know if that was the turning point in his young career. I don't think his early fights really include. I don't think until he fought. I think the turning point in his early career, to be honest, was the fight with Marcel.
Right.
Because I say that just because at that stage he recognized in that fight how much development he needed, and how much maturity he lacked in the ring, because the Panamanians at that time were a little hesitant to. I forget who it was in Panama, but thought Alexis was a little too green for Marcel, and so I think that was a turning point, as if to say, you know what, I know a lot about this sport, but certainly not enough. And Marcel could do that to you. I mean, he was that good of a fighter. I mean, I'm not saying that Marcel, maybe not everybody knows about Ernesto Marcel, but he was a heck of a fighter. So he learned a lot. I think. Like you said, maybe it was an earlier fight, but I always pinpointed the Marcel fight as that kind of that wake up call to Alexis, and if he was going to challenge and become the great fighter that he needed to be.
Because he took it up levels after the Marcel fight, and Marcel, as you said, world champion, he took it up levels. He saw what he needed to do, and after that, he was untouchable, Alexis.
Yeah, and it was I mean, and I think all great fighters go through that transition moment, that moment where they recognize. I don't know if they do it in such a big fight as we saw with Marcel. I wrote a book on Camacho, and I don't think Camacho had that same moment that Alexis, but certain fighters need that moment at that point in their lives. And it gives you a good measuring stick, a good barometer for who you are when you get an early fight against in your career against a guy as good as Marcel. Speed, power, movement. I mean, Marcel had everything, and I think that it was something that Alexis needed.
This, almost brings us to the fight last night with Liam Smith and Chris Eubanks Jr. Eubanks Jr.'s trainer, it's Bomac, Brian McIntyre, trained Terence Crawford. And he said something that I heard Charlie Goldman say. I've heard of Charlie Goldman saying, Angela Dundee told me, that you never mess with a fighter's actual natural style. You just enhance it. So before the fight, they said to him, what have you added to Chris Eubanks' style? He said, nothing. I told them to forget everything else the other guys taught him. Just be yourself. Just move your feet. He said, it's all in the feet. Keep the feet moving, keep the jab going. And it just seemed when you saw Alexis in the ring, he was always in motion, always giving angles. The feet were always moving. His punches looked slow, but they certainly weren't to the guy that was lying on the canvas. I mean, that right hand was devastating. Like you said earlier, when you'd watch him after a couple rounds, you'd think, when's he going to throw the right hand? And then bang, and the other guy would drop. Was Oliveras, I think, wasn't he favored against Arguello in their fight in Los Angeles?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that went 13 rounds, but Arguello was magnificent. He was practically flawless.
Yeah, and like you said, when you have a fighter, now at that stage, I think there was a little bit more, a little bit more focus on who he was going to become, and I think there was a little bit more attention to what the trainer was. He switched off and on between trainers back then a little bit more frequently, and so I think there was a little bit more guidance about like all those things that you just talked about, like the movement, being judicious with your punches. He'd like to say it's not it's where it's when you decide to attack, not necessarily when you think about power, it's always about the time, the timing. It's a timing aspect. So I think at that stage early on, it was like you said, it's like you start, you give them information, you start giving them advice, and then Alexis, I'm sure it didn't take too many fights for them to recognize that at some stage in his career he's pretty much training himself. But I mean, I think the movement, the angles. Like you said, not everybody thought he had great speed, but I mean, some of the, like you said, his opponents probably would disagree with that, but he was so accurate that I don't know if he need, certainly he wasn't as fast as some of the other his peers during that time, but he wasn't slow. I mean, but he had all those attributes, and attributes that when you watch, you're watching that fight and you're learning with him. It's like it's like you're gaining something as you watch a fighter, and that's something neat to see as a fan.
I heard, I don't know if it was Gil Clancy or someone say, I wonder if you'd agree with this. There's a difference, he said, between speed and quickness. He said two fighters standing side by side throwing punches, one may be quicker. He said, or maybe faster. He said, quickness is different than speed. Quickness is seeing the opening as it's developing and getting there first, even if the fighter you're fighting has faster hands. And Alexis certainly had that. I mean, when a guy made a mistake against him, they were done. It ended that abruptly.
Clancy, Gil Clancy, really a legend. Made it. That's a really great point. I think some people, when they see guys with fast hands, they automatically think they're making decisions in a quick fashion. And sometimes, when you don't, Alexis did a great job of shifting up the speeds of his punches. I mean, he sometimes he'd throw that rangefinder, jab for a while, and then he'd bang, and then he'd start whipping it as more of a, as more of like a fierce punch than just a jab. But there's definitely that difference between quickness and speed. And when you think about guys with great speed, and who are also quick. They have both. That they have that dynamic where, like you just said, it's the idea of the instinctual quickness, right? And then they're blessed with speed. It's like those two things are working. So, we know some, we certainly have seen some. I mean, when you think about a guy like Meldrick Taylor, I mean, the speed that Meldrick Taylor had was just astounding. But when it's, when he's just left and he's hurt and he just has his speed, he's not doing anything. But like you said, when he's he's moving and he has those instincts and he's making decisions in a quick, minuscule fashion, I think it adds a depth to his, who he is as a fighter.
It reminded me, Taylor and Chavez, almost like a lumberjack, 6'9", fighting a grizzly bear. Lumberjack's quicker, but the bear's punches, Chavez's punches, didn't get as many, but he was doing much more damage, much more damage than Taylor was. And Arguello did so much damage with every shot. And I love how you mentioned the fact that he would change the speed like a pitcher. So you don't know what really to prepare for, with the speed, or if he's going to keep double jabbing, or just throw one jab and then come over with the right hand. I mean, he changed it up. He was such a smart fighter. I mean, he showed that your brain is probably your most potent weapon in so many fights. I mean, the Escalera fight. I mean, he was the Jim Watt fight. He just, I don't know how to describe the Jim Watt fight using technology as a verb, but he out-teched him. I mean, he was just, and Watt was a really good fighter, but Alexis just outsmarted him throughout the whole fight. Like you said, he's watching it, he's taking it all in like a computer, and then his mind's saying, "This is what we're going to do now," and he does it.
Yeah, and that was that was what made him. I think when you look at some of his late round knockouts, you see that especially with a 15-round fight, he knew that this was a journey, and I don't think fighters recognize that I don't think fighters could fight. I don't think any fighters could fight the way Alexis fought his fight anymore. It was a different time. He felt he had that space and that time to wait and to wait and to wait and then attack. Let's be honest, it didn't always entirely work for him. But for the most part, if you look at his great performances, he was a guy who was just that right hand. I mean, when he starts to land that right hand, you saw a guy who was indestructible. I mean, fabulous. With that right hand, but it was when he threw it, he was punching through his opponents, and I just don't see that level. You see great punchers nowadays. I mean, there are definitely some great punchers out there, but I don't see guys who throw that right hand like that, and it's just it was something that was it was mesmerizing, as you know, Lou.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think guys like Charlie Goldman and Ray Arcel would have just cried in joy watching Alexis fight, because I know when he knocked out Oliveras, my friend, who you've heard of, obviously, Art Hafey, was there and in the dressing room with Ruben after, and Ruben said, "I've never been hit like that. No one ever hit me with that kind of power. That was unbelievable." And he said, "I hit him my best shots," and he just walked through them. He didn't blink. His head didn't go back. He didn't even shrug. He just took him and kept coming. He said, like I was just, yawning at him. He said he was indestructible. And he took his time. He sculpted a masterpiece rather than just the way things are so quick in society today. Like you said, he took his time, he was like a Cezanne or a Gauguin or a Chagall. He took his time and he crafted a masterpiece that us at home and those in the audience would remember forever.
I think nowadays you have great fighters out there who are no doubt would be great in any time period. But I just like the way I don't know too many fighters who made that the same type of development from that Arguello did from the time he started to the time he won his that first title to the end of his career. It just felt like he was building something. Like each fight, you're seeing something a little bit different with each with each performance. And I don't always. Not every great fighter does that. I mean, some great fighters, start to fade away quicker than others, or some great fighters you recognize they have maybe one last great fight that they can evoke. But Alexis, you see him when he's young, so thin and so thin, and then growing into 135, it's like, wow, this is a guy who knew exactly what he wanted to be at a certain, with each stage of his career, he knew that this is where I want to be, and then achieved it. And he made and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something that no one could have lived my life the way I lived it, and I see that, and I see that through the way he conducted his career.
What does he mean specifically by that? That no one could have taken the chances he took in moving up in weight and go through those battles in the ring while facing battles outside the ring?
I think that's what he was referring to at the time about the fact of that at some point in his career he was eventually exiled from his homeland and still had to create a life for himself when most people would have completely been devastated and not been able to move forward past that sad reality that we don't see that with many fighters, where at some point in their career they can't go home, and Alexis faced that, but he faced it with dignity and grace and a sense of integrity that he had showed. I mean, you said that was he a guy who was calm? Now was he calm? Was he patient? He was in his life, but and as angry as he was, the fact that of how they treated him, he still moved forward. He still continued with his career. He still stayed focused, and sometimes it's hard to not many people remember that part of Alexis.
That would destroy anyone except a world champion like him. I mean, what other fighters in history or athletes could make that claim? Jack Johnson, but he skipped bail, and Ali when he was, went and fought in Europe for a while, but there was no one like Alexis. And I think one of the many great things about your book is, I really cried at the end because I missed him. I didn't want. No one was ready when he went. They still wanted him. And did Alexis? Did he know what he meant to people? Did he know how important he was? Not just people at the Boxing Hall of Fame, but to millions of fans around the world.
I to be honest, Lou, I think he did. I think he understood. I think he had a really good understanding of kind of what he stood for, and especially later in his life when he was in a political role and was an ambassador, and he was away from boxing and still was this icon to so many people. I think it would be hard to say that he didn't understand the stature and what he meant to people, but both in the United States and Nicaragua. It was something that I think he also took pride in. That a man of the people. I think that title of a man of the people. Not we called him. So many people looked at him as the gentleman of the ring, but I think he more embraced the idea of someone, a man of the people, in the sense that he was the humble guy, who lived his life in a way that as high, the peak that he reached, the pinnacle he reached in the boxing ring. Outside of the ring, he wasn't. He never really changed who he was, and when he was as a political figure, and when he was able to have some influence and make some changes within Managua, I think that only added to his legacy.
I remember going to see him. As we spoke before we went on there, I at the Hall of Fame, and I just saw him from a distance, and he looked like a movie star from the 1930s or 40s. I mean, with the beautiful hat, the beautiful crisp linen suit. It was a hot day. Everyone was sweating, not Alexis. And as I said to you before, George Chiarello ran to hug him. So did Nino Benvenuti. Angelo went over and they kissed each other. And Gil Clancy went over and they kissed each other. Everyone was just grabbing him and kissing him. And he stood for hours outside signing autographs for everyone, but a lot for children. And he talked to every one of them. A lot of guys go there and they go, here you go. But he would say, what's your name? Where do you go to school? What's your favorite subject? There was no one like that. It was almost like he was from another world, another time.
Yeah,
gentleman.
Well, Lou, I want to just kind of build off of that. He was a guy who, his legacy, and this is something that's unique to Alexis. His legacy may be even more about how he made people feel outside the ring rather than how he made people feel inside the ring. And I truly mean that. I can't say that about any other fighter. This is just that sense with Alexis that when and I saw this when I went to Nicaragua, is that when I met him, he was asking me about me, about my family, about where I'm coming from, and my relationship, with my family and my father. I mean, these were things that boxers, athletes, first off, they, like you said, a lot of them don't feel like they have the time, right? And then you have Alexis, who is not just asking you one question, but then wants to know more about you, and which is so something that's so uplifting, because we want so much out of our sports figures. I mean, we want to go, we want to meet them, we want to get an autograph. At best, we want to shake their hand. But when they reciprocate that and then turn it back to you, it's just this. It creates one of those memories that it's hard to forget when someone does that. And when and like you said, Lou, not everybody, some people just sign their autograph and you're on your way, right? And you have that you have that as a memory. But with Alexis, and you have someone actually asking you about you, talking to you, it just it's something that stays with you for a long time.
It's a real person. I mean, what I didn't forget, Christian, was, and I'll never forget, there were so many families at the Hall of Fame, and kids would run to him and he'd pick them up like it was his own kid, and then he'd sign the autograph, and the kid would take a couple steps, turn, and run back and hug him. And he hadn't turned away yet. He was still looking right at the kid. And I thought, this is a really human being. This is the people's champion. This is a person who belongs to the world. He found the world, but he didn't lose himself. I mean, I went with a friend of mine who lives in Vancouver now. He was working at the Sports Network here, covering boxing, which is like ESPN, which owns the Sport Network up here. And we went to see the Arguello fights on pay-per-view, not the Arguello fight, excuse me, Aaron Pryor fight on pay-per-view. And I think it was the second, I can't remember, I think it was the second or first fight, 13th round. He hit him with the right hand, and I thought he killed Pryor. And my friend said to me, Pryor's got to be juiced. And of course, we find out later, Panama Lewis, who was in his corner, Panama Lewis came to the Fifth Street Gym when I was there with Angelo one time, the new Fifth Street Gym, and he wanted to come up and say hi to Angelo. And Angelo said, I don't want to see him. He's a piece of crap. And then he asked again, and Angelo sent someone down to say, if you come up to see me, you're going to leave in a pine box. He hated Panama Lewis for what he done to Alexis and what he did to Billy Collins and so many other fighters. It's amazing now that, more than likely, did Alexis ever speak about that? I mean, what other conclusion is there that he was juiced for that fight, that they had a stimulant, whether it was cocaine or whatever?
Yeah, So just a little background on my book. The so one of the things that Alexis, when I wrote my book, it was after Alexis had passed.
Hmm.
So I had we were in discussions for the book, to do the book, and then unfortunately Alexis passed, and so it wasn't a kind of a coordinated set of interviews that I did throughout. It was, I met him once in Managua, and I got to do an interview there, and then he passed, and then someone talked to me about a book. But one of the things that he said about he didn't speak to the to what Panama Lewis had done. What he spoke to more was, he said, what they do to you, what you do to them on the way in, they do to you on the way out. So I think he took a more diplomatic approach, and with me, in saying, that what was happening is not something that I'm going to rage against, but I will say that at that stage in my career, I was not the same fighter with that. So he didn't, at least directly to me, he didn't show any animosity toward toward what we were saying with Aaron Pryor. That being said, I mean, it's hard to deny the wrongdoing that occurred there in that particular fight. As great as Pryor was, I mean, we saw it with our own eyes, what was happening, in the ring.
And at the Hall of Fame, Pryor didn't deny that. He said, yeah, there was stuff in the bottle. I'm not going to say what it was, but yeah, and as you said, Alexis was just past his prime at that point when he fought Pryor both times. So earlier on, I think it would have been a different story. When I'm 62. So when I was growing up, they always talked Durán and Arguello will fight. But they were always at different weight classes. Durán was moving up to welter while Alexis was junior lightweight. Was there any seriousness about that? Were they ever close to having a fight between the two of them?
Yes. Before that move occurred, Durán went up to him in I think it was an airport, and went up to Alexis and started, started talking to him, and, why don't you fight me, man? Come on and fight me. And Alexis was like, easy. You don't, and I'm paraphrasing, you don't approach me like that. I mean, I'm a very serious man. Please, don't treat me like that. Durán wanted that fight. I mean, everybody wanted that fight. But there were serious talks. It's just the move was, the weight move, like you said, it was too hard to overcome, and to make that fight happen. As much as I don't know how serious in the sense that they got close to actually making that fight, but like you said, there was some major discussions around that showdown, and what a fight it would have been.
I know Art Hafey told me he fought Alexis in Nicaragua, and he said he had trouble with his hand wraps, not from Alexis, but from the military who were out in force for the fight. And he just said it was a terrifying thing, coming from the East Coast, coming from Canada, where unfortunately there's now a lot more gun violence, but at that time, to have 20 gun murders in Canada in a year back then would have been a lot.
Okay.
In an entire country. So to see all these soldiers there with guns saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, and Art saying, I'm just taking a drink of water from the tap, and then saying, well, let me talk to Alexis, he won't mind. But he said it was just a frustrating time. But you mentioned something earlier, Alexis, I didn't know this till I got older. Angela Dundee told me this, that boxers for the most part are friends because they know each other from the amateurs. And you mentioned Bazooka Lemon, and I believe there was one other person that, Billy Costello, that he may have been angry at. But it was very touching, the fight with Ray Mancini, where he told him he loved him after, and he followed through on that, where he actually helped Mancini in Mancini's career, and he wasn't obligated to do that. but he did that out of the kindness of his heart. He helped make him a champion.
Yeah, I love what you have with your father, and really, at that point, you may see that iconic photo of him, kind of cradling, yeah, and so you're right, and I think that's the vital point here, is that he didn't have to do that. It was something that was natural. It wasn't something that was fabricated in any way, and that was just Alexis's way of, he saw people he saw fighters, he saw people in just this way that's hard to describe. It's just that he never saw someone as just an opponent, or would look at them in that fashion, or as like sometimes he's just an opponent as a motivating factor. He saw Ray Mancini. I mean, they were obviously in two different moving in two different directions in their career, but he took the time to say, Ray, this is a pretty much you're going to be a champion, but I love what you have with your father. And when a young fighter sees that someone who could be looked at as a mentor, as Alexis Arguello, I think it does something to them. And he just took that role and ran with it, I think. And it wasn't just Ray Mancini who was I think he did this for a lot of fighters. And so it's just it's kind of a touching thing. And when you think about Arguello, when you think about a guy who is as violent in the ring, it's just amazing to see that he was just as gentle outside of it.
It's interesting. When I met Kenny Norton, he said that he was talking about his fights with Foreman and Ali and different people. And he said, you know what my problem was? And I said, I can't imagine you having a problem, because he was as big as a building. And Angelo called him the muskox. I mean, he was gigantic. And he said, I never hated anyone I fought. I just couldn't. It's not in me. I looked at it as purely a sporting competition. I wanted to beat the man, but I didn't want to really hurt him. And he said it was hard against Ali because I loved him, because I was destitute, living in my car with my son and beating Ali the first time. Instead of fighting for 1,500 a fight, I'm now fighting for 500,000-600,000. So he said, you can't hate a person for that. And it seemed like Alexis just didn't have that hatred in him for other fighters or people, that he viewed it really professionally. It's just, this is a job, it's a business, it's what I do.
Right. I don't, and that wasn't something that was instilled within him. And you saw that, in the pre-fights before some of these, these big fights. He wasn't going to, play that, or play into that, that type of building up for the fight. That was even if it wasn't for, they wanted him to do that for the promotion of the fight. It just, I can't hate, I can't hate. I'm not going to do it to fulfill a promotional need. So it was just, it's just something. I got to tell you, when I went to Nicaragua, I mean, just talking to people about Alexis, it just reinforced exactly what you were, what you're saying about, a human being, someone who understood, where he stood inside and outside the ring, dapper guy, always, dapper, but natural in the way that he treated others. So I think all those things came through when I met the people who loved him in Nicaragua.
I know that when he passed away, I mean, his opponents loved him, and there were hard. I mean, I was in tears reading Jim Watt's comment that he had lost one of his friends and idols, and that he would miss him every day for the rest of his life. How upset he was. And that wasn't just him. That was, I mean, as you well know, Ray Mancini and so many other fighters, and guys like George Chavallo and Nino Benvenuti and other people, Muhammad Ali, that knew him and were just heartbroken. You know what? There's been so much written about how he passed away, it's whether he was murdered by the government, whether it was suicide. Do you have any thoughts on what happened, or will we ever know for sure?
The so at the end of his, and by the way, Pryor was someone who he became very good friends with.
That's right.
They really grew to be close friends, which talk about not hating an opponent. Someone you'd be hard pressed to find many fighters who were in a situation like Alexis was in those two fights, and then coming out and having a lasting friendship with Pryor.
You saved Pryor's life. Pryor was a drug addict. Yeah,
exactly. So the situation with Alexis at the end of his life. I mean, well, first of all, do I think something, where we're going to find out? Yes, I do. After this regime and Ortega, that they no longer, he's no longer in power, or something, occurs where he's, pushed out of power. I think we're going to find out what really happened that night with Alexis. I don't know. I think what I tried to convey in the book itself was the understanding that the Sandinistas had forced Alexis into a place of no return in his life. Emotionally, they had just destroyed him, to a point where he had no, there was no recourse. He couldn't come back from what either they had threatened him with, or had threatened him physically, or with at that stage politically. You remember, this is a guy who was people looked at Alexis at that stage in his life and were saying, wow, he's really turning the corner in his life, and it wasn't something where he had gone through a lot with difficulties with finances, drugs, and he was becoming, and he recognized that at this stage he was improving as a person, and was and I think that if the people who loved him understood that, this wasn't a guy who was going to give up. He was still fighting to become better each day. But I think the Sandinistas that evening, when they eventually stripped him of all powers and duties, and made him, pretty much left him as a figurehead, that Alexis would have nowhere else to turn. So
they besmirched his reputation. They destroyed that. They tried to.
Right. I mean, they knew. I mean, they knew. Everybody in Nicaragua knows Alexis and all the things, that make him tick, that he thrives on. And once they stripped him of his ability to help others, I mean, that was the one thing that defined him.
Right. That was his reason for being.
He had nothing left. So, unfortunately. So long story short, I mean, on my end, I think we will find out. They can put up as many tributes as they want for Alexis, but I think the people that love him recognize that those are hollow at best. So I just think that I don't. It could be 10 years from now, it could be 20 years from now, but there will be answers.
Whenever it comes out, Christian, you're the only one on the planet who can write the book about it. You have to write the book about that, the truth.
Yeah. So thank you, Lou.
It's only you.
Thank you.
So, Alexis, how would you say he should be remembered? Not only as an 3-division all-time great world champion. I mean, if you listed the greatest world champions pound for pound, Alexis is always in the top 2 or 3, if not 1. I mean, you can't rate him lower. Angel Dundee said you can't rate him lower than number 1.
Dundee said that they couldn't rate Alexis lower than 1 at what? At just overall or at a certain weight class?
Overall, pound for pound, a featherweight, lightweight, junior lightweight. You can't rate him less than number 1. There's no one you can put in a ring against him and say this guy's got a chance.
Yeah, he was that type. I mean, I loved him most at 130. Actually, you know what? To be honest, as much as I loved him at 130, I thought he was probably the most intimidating and difficult to fight at 135. But he just didn't have it. You know, the numbers are, bring you if you want to look at numbers and victories, the 130 is, I thought he was a little bit too skinny at 126. 130 started to find his power, and he was just so tough. I mean, a guy who, he talked about after this Escalera fight where he was getting, he was giving him stitches on a train in Italy. Just a guy who was, one thing we don't talk about is how tough he really was. So I thought he was just fabulous. I mean, you can talk about other fighters at 130. I mean, junior lightweight with Mayweather and the Chavezes, but I'll take Alexis on that one.
It's interesting because when he fought Escalera both times, but watching the first time, Angelo said to me, "I'm genuinely afraid that Escalera could die because Alexis is not going to quit. He's not going down. He's going to keep coming forward and pounding him. And if Escalera's trainers care about their fighter, they should be stopping this because he's taken a real bad beating."
Yeah, and that was just Alexis could take a punch. I mean, and also he was. You forget he wasn't as big as a volume puncher as some other fighters. Durán was, Durán and Gomez, they were constant, movement, punching, the whole fight chasing you down. Alexis wasn't that same volume puncher, but when he wanted to attack, his combinations. I mean, we haven't talked about the types of combinations he threw. I mean, they were. If he wanted to really intensify the attack on a fighter, he would, and that's when it got scary because he had that ability to put his punches together in that way. It's just which one is going to connect and knock you out.
Tremendous accuracy. Sorry to interrupt. And Angelo said he only saw 2 guys that reminded him of Joe Louis in combination punching: Carlos Zarate and Alexis Arguello. And what he loved, and it put tears in Angelo's face, is when he had a guy hurt, hit him with a good right hand to the chin, and the guy would bring his hands up, and Alexis would throw a left hook to the liver. And Angelo would say, "That's textbook boxing. That's what they've been teaching for 300 years. You hit him in the chin, his hands go up, take his liver, and then bring the hands down, and then he's ready to go." And he said, "That's brilliance. That's a guy who knows how to do it. That's someone who makes it a sport." And just
that was Alexis. I mean, sorry to cut you off, but
no.
It was we see guys who are textbook, who follow, you like you said, you see it, and it's it's almost like clockwork, things that you're looking for in the ring. But when you hear that from Dundee, it's certainly something that's special.
Oh, Angelo loved him. What the thing is, the fans would hug him, and he would pick up the young ones, and they'd give him a kiss. But the older ones, like Chivallo or Angelo or Gil Clancy, they'd grab his face and kiss him. They all did, and you thought, this is the longest hug in the world because they didn't want to let go of him. So, I mean, I think, I pray to God that we find out what happens and that you write the book on it. And also, what I wanted to thank you most is because of your book, he's still alive. He's still very much with us. He's still relevant everywhere around the world today. As you know better than anyone, people still talk about Alexis Arguello. People still see fighters and say, Yeah, he's really good, but he's not Alexis Arguello. There's no way you can say he's as good as Alexis Arguello, because that's the highest compliment you could give a fighter in and out of the ring. El Flaco Explosivo, just not just great in the ring, but a true gentleman and a gentleman and the ultimate sportsman. You know, if you were going to pick an ambassador for the sport, it would have to be Alexis Arguello. There couldn't be anyone else.
If and I appreciate that. That's the best compliment I could ever get is if that, you know, if the book keeps his spirit alive, then I you know, hopefully have done something right with the way I told his story. But like you said, there's definitely more to come. There's going to be more answers about Alexis, but you know, people aren't going to forget Alexis, and when they think about I don't care if a guy's 50-0, and I don't care if a guy's coming in and he wins his first 40 fights. You can be a great fighter. You can be a great fighter. You can be a 4-time, you know, 4 or 5 division, whatever it is, and you still might not be Alexis Arguello, and that's okay, because you know you know, the intangibles. People forget the intangibles of Alexis, the way that he, you know, built his career and all of the turmoil outside of it, and the way that, you know, that he stayed and how formidable he was, and his, you know, look at his numbers, look at, you know, his career. He's not a guy that fought 30 or 40 fights and then retired. This is a guy, you know, and when you look at it, you more than 80 fights, and you know, the way he fought and the way he conducted himself, it was more than a fighter, and that is something that that I think sometimes people forget when they think about all-time greats. There's more than just the numbers.
Right. Oh yeah. When he went to different divisions and would move up, he always went for the best guy in that division. He didn't go for the guy, you know, who was the weakest link. He didn't want that. Who's the best at lightweight? I want him. Who's the best at feather? I want him. Who's the best at junior lightweight? That's the guy I want. And in his time, there weren't 4 title belts in every division and silver belts and champion and recess. He did it. I mean, he started when there were only 8 world champions, and to be the best then meant you were the best. And I don't know. I don't think there's a fighter in any weight class today that could, or featherweight, or lightweight, or junior lightweight that could beat him. I don't think Tank Davis beats him. I don't think Devin Haney beats him. I don't think anybody beats him. I think he's just too good for those guys. Too smart, knows how to apply all the knowledge, took everything he learned, and, you know, became the best ever in his weight classes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those guys, they're not. They've got a while to be able to, you know, be mentioned in the category with Alexis.
Yeah, and they probably will never be mentioned in that category.
Yeah, so,
you know, it's just one of the greatest of all time. I want to thank you so much. I could talk to you for another 25 hours, but I'd like to have you back on to discuss your books on Wilfredo Gomez, Hector Camacho, and Duran when you have time. And I just want to say, Christian, it's been fantastic having you on. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. And I know all the people watching have enjoyed it. I wanted to ask you, where can people get your book? I know they can get it on Amazon, but where else?
You know, right now, I mean, this book is where is okay? You could right now. Amazon is probably the one place where you can still get it. I mean, okay. I don't know. There are too many other places right now. I mean, to get it, it's just. I mean, you're looking at a little bit older, but
it's also popular. I mean, it's hard to find because people are out of stock all the time.
You can buy it on like I've seen it on eBay recently, but I wish I had more answers about that.
You have your own website?
Yeah, ChristianGiudice.com, but I haven't been selling them recently on that site. But if well, I'm gonna look into it. Maybe I can share. I've been more focused a little bit on. I'm working on a book on Salvador Sanchez, so I haven't really.
Yeah.
So
That's just puts a lump in my throat. I didn't believe it when I saw on the news that he had passed away at that age. I thought, this isn't funny. Why would someone joke like that? And you can only, I mean, as an all-time great at 22, and possibly the greatest fighter that ever lived, if he'd been allowed to, if his life had gone on. And Gomez was favored over him, and he took him apart.
Yeah. So I can't wait to, I just started it, so I'm learning. I'll be working a lot more with the idea of Salvador Sanchez. So I'll be happy to. Yeah. So
thank you. Go ahead, sir.
No, I really wanted to have one more Latin fighter to focus on, and Sanchez was someone who really unique story and background, and so can't wait to dive into this one.
Oh, I can't wait to read that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And Christian Giudice has been our guest today on Ring Talk. And this will be posted, and I will send you a link, Christian, that you can post. I know everyone out there enjoyed it, to our friends all over Canada and States and in England as well. Christian, we look forward to the Salvador Sanchez book. But in the meantime, go on Amazon and get the book on Alexis Arguello. Get Christian's book on Wilfredo Gomez. If you didn't see Wilfredo Gomez, I feel sorry for you. You have to read this book. It's magnificent. It's explosive as Wilfredo Gomez is, and thank the Lord he's still with us. And his book on Hector Camacho is also a brilliant book. Anything Christian writes is a brilliant, magnificent book. It's very gripping. It'll tug at your heartstrings. It'll bring a smile to your face. But in this book and his other books, but especially in this book too, you get to walk alongside Alexis Arguello. And to be able to have a writer be able to put you there beside him is a very special, rare quality. And Christian, thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will speak to you soon.
Lou, this has been so special. Thank you for reaching out to me, and I love talking boxing with you, my man.
Thank you. Vice versa. Right. You take care. That was great. What a